Welcome to History vs. Hollywood. Please head to historyvshollywood.substack.com to subscribe and always be the first to hear about a new episode directly to your inbox. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of History vs. Hollywood. This is a special bonus episode. We're going to keep it unlocked for now, but this will be bonus content going forward. This is History vs. Hollywood's first ever History vs. Hollywood Hot Takes.
Well, hey.
Yeah. And Charlie and I are going to be looking at some historical films that we weren't planning on doing full History vs. Hollywood series on, and basically just giving you our opinions on them, but focusing on the actual film itself, really, rather than the history behind it. There will be a little bit of history, but it's primarily going to focus on the film. Today, well, Charlie, what are we talking about today?
Well, we've decided to talk about a film that isn't 20 years old. Where, we've got our finger on the zeitgeist now.
Yeah, finger on the pulse.
We're going to talk about Gladiator 2 because we both watched it recently and both have some, slightly differing opinions on it. What did you think?
You know what? I thought it was a lot of fun. To be honest, it was a good romp. The opening scene I thought was really good. I was sort of like, hell yeah, brothering by the end of the first scene. And then to be honest, as it kind of went on, the longer it went on, to be honest, I thought it got worse as it went on, in my opinion. But I thought it was good fun. What was your take?
Well, yeah, it was very fun. And I assume you have more of a strong opinion about some of the historical inaccuracies and things that never happened and things that were changed for literally no reason whatsoever. Besides maybe Ridley Scott liked a different name. But yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was enjoyable. It was a bit silly. But I think really it's a great opportunity comparing Gladiator 1 and Gladiator 2 to talk about a few things I find interesting in the writing of scripts. Because, it looked gorgeous. It was really well acted, well shot. But it was missing some heart, I think. And hopefully I'm going to be able to talk a bit about that today. And then you will be talking about some of the historical stuff, some of the stories that maybe inspired what Ridley Scott was doing. Is that right?
Yeah. So first half of the podcast, Charlie's going to run us through the film and his take on how and why the film was made. So looking forward to that. And then in the second half, we'll look a little bit more on the historical setting for the film, some of the historical inaccuracies. Not going to get too granular. We're not going to discuss why, for some reason, in one scene, there was a guy drinking coffee and reading a newspaper in a cafe in Rome. None of those things existed at the time, but there are some kind of maybe bigger themes that we can get into, which hopefully will be interesting for you all. So I hope you're looking forward to it. Charlie, should we get into it then? Film analysis.
I'm just laughing. That is so silly. I didn't even realize at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sure. So, obviously you've done a newsletter on Ridley Scott's original film Gladiator, which, amazing, heart-touching, beautiful. If you don't cry at the end, you're probably a psychopath.
Yeah, good plug, by the way. Good plug. Everyone get across that. Have a read. Thank you very much, Charles.
Yeah, find it on Substack. But the problem with this one is, even though it's so similar in so many ways, I think most people left it going, wow, the action scenes were fun and Paul Mescal's acting was fantastic. But you're sort of left feeling a bit hollow, I suppose. And this is the thing with films in general, is I like to think of films a lot like people. And the main thing is you can forgive so much about people, them being boring sometimes, them being a bit too silly sometimes, them being, inconsistent, with a few holes in their character. You can forgive it all if at their core they are, emotionally engaging and they're, they keep consistent throughout. They're good. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Actually, Charlie, maybe just to pull you up a second.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your film credentials? Why do I keep referring to you in the intros as our resident film expert, just to give the listeners
Right.
an idea?
So, I've worked in the film industry now for well, not too long, 3 years, and before that, studied for 4 years on a film course. So, I've written a bunch of my own films, worked on many, many films, watched, God knows, hundreds, thousands maybe of films. And I've done a lot of analysis on them, breaking down story, breaking down character, that kind of thing. So I like to think, I at least sort of know what I'm talking about. Maybe I don't.
Know a thing or two about it. You also won an award at one point, didn't you?
Oh yes, but that was art department stuff. Nothing to do with what we're talking about today. And then unless I say like, wow, the sets look good, and award-winning opinion on
Award-winning
that.
opinions on set design. Yeah, won
Um,
at the British Short Film Awards, I believe, best set design.
yeah,
Just out of university, so not bad. Anyway, enough blowing smoke up your ass. Yeah.
um, so so we're talking about, I guess, there are so many little problems you can pick up with on a film like this, but I'm really just going to focus on the heart of it. And the heart of it is the main character, his motivations, and the story that's trying to prevent him from getting what he wants. So, just want to cover this again. Nothing to do with Paul Mescal. His acting was incredible. It was more the writing of his character, Lucius, that's the problem. So when you compare to Gladiator 1, you have Russell Crowe's character, Maximus, and his motivation the entire way through the film is to kill Commodus, right? That's clear throughout.
Yeah.
There is a B plot involving senators about trying to bring Rome back under the control of the Senate, which is the A plot in the sequel, with revenge sort of becoming the B plot throughout. The problem is when you start a character like Lucius as someone driven by revenge, and then you halfway through change him to this sort of idealistic Rome civilization savior, the audience sort of loses motivation, I guess, to be invested in his character. So he is chasing Pedro Pascal, hunting him down. The problem is that we've met Pedro Pascal's character throughout. We keep getting shown him to be a really lovely, genuine guy. So the audience is going to struggle to connect to a character who is trying to kill a nice guy. You know it's not going to happen. You know that's not where he's heading. So you're sort of left with, okay, if he's not the antagonist, Pedro Pascal, who is? You've got your
and let's face it, everybody. Pedro Pascal's having a moment in the sun at the moment. He's everybody's favorite cuddly sort of dad bod. We love him. So it's hard to hate Pedro Pascal these days as well.
Exactly. And a huge part of getting behind a good guy is disliking the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
Understanding him, but wanting him dead. So now you're watching this film and you're like, well, Pedro Pascal's not the bad guy. If you're clever enough to think ahead at all, you know that he's not going to end up in the climax fighting this guy. So you look to see who to latch your anger onto, I suppose. And you're left with three options. Denzel Washington's character, who at this point is almost an ally.
Yeah. Sort of a lovable rogue type.
Yeah, exactly. He's got his own motivations behind the scenes, but he is not in contrast with Paul Mescal's character, Lucius. They're actually working together towards their goals. So you can't feel any sort of antagonism towards him. And then you're left with the two emperors who, having seen Gladiator 1, the gladiator wanted to kill the emperor. That seems like the classic place to put your anger. But these two, they are silly.
Yeah.
Sort of harmless. The equivalent of like ecstasy taking clubbers.
Yeah.
And
sort of slightly not with reality. Could be a bit dangerous, but actually I think they just want to have a good time.
And also like a little bit tragic. Obviously, didn't grow up properly. And they're quite, I would say, they could kill people at a moment's notice, quite sympathetic.
I mean, there's a moment in the film that maybe kind of encapsulates that, where the younger brother, Getter,
Mm.
sort of loses it and brings out his sword and tries to kill. I can't remember exactly who it was, but then the older brother, Caracalla, holds him back and sort of drags him away and stops there being any violence from happening.
Yeah,
Which
that
it's sort of like they're supposed to be dangerously unhinged lunatics, but actually in that scene, it's sort of like, oh, they're actually harmless, and they're between the two of them, they're balancing out to be a not that bad pair.
yeah, a dangerously unhinged lunatics. They don't make for great antagonists. I mean, if you look at Joaquin Phoenix's role as Commodus in the first film, he was a bit crazy, he was a bit unhinged, but he was intelligent and conniving
Mm,
and sinister. And you knew the entire way through the film, this is the guy we want to hate.
mm.
So then going back to Lucius, then his revenge story falls apart when Pedro Pascal's character says that he knew his father. Um, and all this wind goes out of the sails of the first half of the film. Now, Lucius is sort of left in the lurch whilst he tries to figure out that actually what he wants from life is to make a Rome, this idea of Rome where, what is it, where everyone's equal.
So
Um,
just to pull you up again and go back to that part about yeah, him meeting Pedro Pascal's character for the first time, and yeah, the wind going entirely out of his sails of his whole revenge plan. Simply, it seemed just because Pedro Pascal says, "Oh, I loved your mother,"
yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, I saw the man, and now I don't hate him at all." I don't know. To me, that seemed a little bit. I found it. It was a little, especially because he's in the Colosseum. He has his blood up. He's sort of battering him with a sword, and then he just says, "I loved your mother," and then, oh, that's fine. I don't mind that you killed my wife now. Um,
Well, yeah, this is the problem, I think, with this character is he's pretty unflawed, Lucius.
mm,
I mean, there's no sign at any point really that he's in any danger in a one-to-one battle. They make it very clear at the beginning when he beats up who was it? The sort of Denzel Washington's bodyguard.
mhm.
He's got the knuckle dusters on.
Oh yeah,
From the beginning, you establish this guy is a very good fighter, and then
bruiser.
you don't feel a huge amount of threat whenever he's in the arena. Coupled with the fact that him being in the arena isn't particularly helping him towards his goals, right? It was sort of helping him towards his revenge goal, but as soon as you realize that the revenge is not what you want, you're left with this guy who dreams of an ideal Rome. See, it all just gets so murky here.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, right? Is you don't have good motivation for your character. And that's the thing. When it comes to writing, you want simple character motivation, an antagonist with another simple character motivation, and then what you want is the complexity is from them getting what they want, right? So the complexity comes externally, internally, rather than what they're doing with Lucius, which is giving him complex and vague character motivations. And then that brings us on to the outside obstacles, right? So, like I touched on before, his fights, they never really seemed like too much of a challenge. They had to force a bit of a challenge in the Rhino fight, where for some reason, even though there were still 6 living gladiators in the arena on Lucius's side, Lucius, forgotten it now. They leave him to have a one-on-one fight with the Rhino Rider, which fine, whatever. But there just doesn't really seem like any threat of him losing. And
No, I think the bit that sort of brought it home to me, that the Rhino was never really any threat to Lucius, was there's sort of a cut back scene with the Rhino sort of riding around in a circle, and the guy's got an axe, and he sort of throws the axe at one of the gladiators, and it just sort of like pathetically lands in front of him. It's not even like he dodges it; it just sort of lands on the floor in front of the
yeah,
gladiator, like a sort of like the guy had never thrown anything before. I don't know. At that point, I was sort of like, oh well, there's no way that this rhino is going to do any damage to anyone because the rider's a bit, you're sort of feckless. I don't know.
yeah. And yeah, no, I mean, exactly. But it is what it is. It's a combat scene. It's,
Yeah.
A different spot. The thing that did trouble me is the amount of times he disobeyed the Emperor's commands in the arena.
Hmm.
which Russell Crowe does, and it gets him in huge trouble in the first film.
Hmm.
Um, he will be told to execute someone, he won't do it. He'll be told that his life needs to be spared, and he'll say, execute me.
Hmm.
He's constantly, you know, shoving it back in the faces of the emperors. And every time he does it, that scene ends, and I'm going, ooh, how's this gonna come back to bite him? And it never does. The emperors just seem to love him more.
I,
It's
I mean, he fired an arrow at the emperors at one point, and it didn't really do anything either. They just sort of ran away.
Yeah, so he just seems to be, I don't know, every time he does something bad, he just goes back into his cage and comes out for the next fight.
Very
Um,
thick plot armor.
yeah. Um, and then, yeah, obviously Denzel Washington's character, the antagonist, he has his own motivations, ex-slave, wanting to rise to power to destroy Rome. Um,
But again,
which,
I thought not very well. I feel like we discovered his motivations very sort of haphazardly. At one
yeah,
point, for example, well, you find out he's a slave kind of later on, and then he mentions that he has a destiny, but never really tells you what that destiny is. Was his destiny to become consul? Was his destiny to become emperor? You know, it doesn't really say. I don't know.
yeah,
I
it
thought that a
seemed
bit hard to wrap my head around.
he wanted to become emperor, I think, to then destroy Rome. Okay, and then the climax of the film, the
Hmm.
fight between Denzel Washington and Paul Mescal. Um, Denzel is in what, toga robes against Paul Mescal, who's in his father's armor, just coming from a battle.
Mm,
And you've never seen Denzel fight, really?
no.
I have no frame of reference. He's an older consul. There's just no danger of Paul Mescal losing that
Yeah.
final battle. When you compare it to Commodus, surrounded by the Praetorian Guard, and Commodus has injured Maximus before the fight.
Hmm.
You feel tense. You feel the tension throughout. Um, so, I mean, again, just the difference between the two, just an antagonist who is played well, like Denzel played his character, who is clearly the antagonist throughout. His anger is faced towards him, and then in the end, you get a satisfying fight.
Hmm.
That is going to bring a lot more heart and like a lot more connection with the character than, um, I suppose, this sort of trying to do plot twists and changes in emotion and all that kind of stuff. If you're setting up a revenge film with a character who's, pushed by revenge, continue to make it a revenge film. Having said all that, the thing is like I said, with the characters and the acting and the set design, the twins, the monkeys, the consoles, all that, I thought that was all lovely, really engaging, really fun. Um, my attention was on the film the whole time. It could have been, I mean, pretty flawless. I can even forgive the sharks in the
Yeah.
museum. I thought that was fun. It's a film. It's a blockbuster film. You're allowed to have indulgences like that. But like I said, if it doesn't have the heart, you know,
Mm.
you're going to focus on those things, right? If you're not immersed in the character's motivations. Uh,
And it this lack of heart as well, it makes you more critical as you start to sort of slightly feel that the film isn't giving its all to you. You start to sort of almost look for cracks in it.
mm,
Like right at the beginning, Paul Mescal is captured, he's branded, and he's taken to Ostia, the port near Rome. And then all of a sudden, he is in a sort of slave pit in what looks like to be northern Africa again. There's lots of sort of goat herders and men with turbans around. And in fact, we know that it was filmed in Morocco because when we were in Morocco a few years ago, we in fact came across that exact film set in
yeah, you
Morocco.
did.
So a bit strange. He's been taken to Rome, and then it seems he's in northern Morocco. Perhaps they were trying to indicate some sort of Roman town at the time, but it didn't seem that way.
No.
And then you have a scene following that where he's taken to a party where the emperors are there and forced to sort of fight someone. That obviously goes sort of slightly traumatically, etc. The emperors laugh at him. And then the next scene is him being brought to Rome for the first time,
That was
which
odd.
is a little, yeah, it feels a bit I don't know, like was
Yeah,
so where was he fighting at the party? Why were the emperors all of a sudden who, are very paranoid? They've left Rome to go somewhere to watch a fight?
yeah. I maybe someone's country estate because obviously politicians would have something. But yeah, you're right. I was very confused by that moment as well.
Maybe, but there's that also scene between Denzel Washington and I forget his name, the sort of guy who ended up owing him a load of money, who he meets for the first time, and he's like, nothing happens in Rome without your say so, which indicates that they're probably in Rome. And then the next scene is him being brought to Rome for the first
Yeah,
time, which
ridiculous.
is a bit weird, really. Anyway, and you sort of, I think it's that sort of thing. You start hunting for those moments, which if a film is sort of engaging you emotionally, you don't start looking for. And I was starting to look for them in the film because
Mm,
it was starting to kind of get away from me, to be honest.
right, exactly. Well, that is in short, because obviously with any film, if you've ever seen the YouTube channel Cinema Sins, you'll know what I mean. Any film, you can pick holes in it
Yeah.
for as long as you want. But um, I think if they just fixed, I don't know, it would change the story completely. But if they just got you engaged with Paul Mescal's character,
Mm-hmm.
which can only be done through the writing. I mean, Paul Mescal did more than enough acting wise. Then I think it would have been a fantastic film.
Yeah, it was still very good. As you say, there were lots of very good performances. I personally thought that the two brother emperors absolutely stole the show. I thought they were brilliant,
Yeah.
particularly the older chap. We really should be looking these guys' names up. But I thought he was brilliant, and it was a lot of fun. And those sort of scenes of him sort of demonically staring at the Colosseum and calling down the god's wrath on people, I thought were really brilliant. And that kind of saved it a bit for me. I mean, I would have watched it just for that, to be honest.
Yeah, it was very fun. And yeah, like we said, a lot of it was a lot of good fun. And if you've somehow managed to get this way far through and not heard any spoilers, we are spoiling.
Yeah. Yeah, again, we should put that up top. If you're listening to a History versus Hollywood, just expect spoilers
Yeah.
because we're talking about films that have come out already.
Anyway, that's enough of sort of picking at the low hanging fruit of slamming a critically mediocre perceived film. But we'll get into why you're really here after the break, because Jack will be taking us through maybe some of the historical inaccuracies, and maybe some of the stories that inspired Ridley Scott's choices.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Great. So we'll be back after the break.
See you then. Okay, and yeah, welcome back in this second half of History vs. Hollywood Hot Takes. Good name, lots of alliteration there. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the historical context of the film. So yeah, I will be running you through that.
And we just want to preface this with the fact that we are aware that he wasn't going for entire historical accuracy. He didn't just completely misread the stories. We are aware of that, but it's good conversation points. Good to learn a little bit about what actually happened.
Yeah, Ridley Scott has made it evidently clear in some of his recent films that he's more interested in a good story, which is great. I say never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
You say that, do you? Is that one of yours?
It's one of mine. I actually made that one up. Yeah. He even, there's even a moment where a historian sort of contacted him about the historical inaccuracies in his recent film Napoleon, to which he replied to "Get a life," which is,
We told him.
you know what, Ridley Scott's a man. He's 86. He's probably very stuck in his ways.
86. Wow.
I know. He's getting on a bit. Anyway, the historical background. So let's talk through that. So, obviously set in ancient Rome, in the Roman Empire period. It is a sequel, actually. I didn't think it was going to be, but it is a direct sequel to the first film. The first film was obviously set in the wake of the death of Marcus Aurelius, and you'll know that in the movie because they keep talking about Paul Mescal keeps talking about it, sitting at his grandfather's knee and how he had a dream that was Rome, and if you had to whisper it, otherwise it would collapse. So this is Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome's supposed vision of returning Rome to the people and everybody be equal. It was run by the Senate, even though the Senate definitely wasn't on any sort of equal grounds as the people. Just to clarify that, Marcus Aurelius had absolutely no intention in real life of returning anything power that he held. He held absolute authority over Rome, and he had no intention of returning it to the people at all. He also had no intention of giving it to anyone besides Commodus upon his death. Marcus Aurelius was absolutely well aware of the shortcomings of Commodus' son, and it's portrayed pretty well in the first Gladiator movie. Even still, he decided it was best if Commodus took over.
And you can hear more about that in your newsletter, can't you, Jack?
I wrote a whole series on the first the first Gladiator movie, and there's an entire episode dedicated to Marcus Aurelius' relationship with his son Commodus. So get across that. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Yes, so what happened at the end of the first film, obviously, is Commodus' death. Now, I realized Commodus was not murdered in the Colosseum. He was murdered by his wrestling coach after a list had been found that he'd written of all the people he was going to kill the following day. So they thought best to bump him off. He was basically just as maniacal as they portray him in the film. His death plunged the Roman Empire into a civil war period known as the Year of the Five Emperors. It was absolute madness. First, this guy called Pertinax gets into power, but is assassinated shortly afterwards by the Praetorian Guard, the Praetorian Guard being the sort of emperor's personal bodyguard, the army within Rome, as the Roman armies were not allowed in Rome themselves. They seem to be constantly getting involved in palace intrigue and assassinations and so on.
And we saw them with the purple clothing and the ear guards shaped like actual ears.
Yeah,
in Gladiator.
Interesting. Costume design there. Very cool. They were the guys that were always facing the crowd, which I guess is a sign of the way those two Roman emperors, the two brother emperors, were managing the Roman population very much by force at the time. So they kill this guy Pertinax right away. The Praetorian Guard then proceeds to auction off the empire to the highest bidder. Like, quite literally, they were like, who will pay us the most money, and we'll give them the emperorship. And this guy called Julianus buys it. This causes widespread outrage. 3 Roman generals then declare themselves emperor. One of these guys was a chap named Septimus Severus. He's brilliant. He wins a lot of battles against these other 2 emperors. He then marches on Rome, kills Julianus, and then Septimus Severus emerges as emperor, and he's very successful at it. He has 18 years of very solid, very harsh rule.
He's not to be confused with the spell from Harry Potter, though. I assume that cuts people open. He is a man. He was a Roman emperor, not a spell.
Yeah, so he ruled for 18 years. Pretty solid. Actually, interestingly, about the same amount of time that Commodus reigned for, which they don't really portray in the film. He dies very early on in the film, but he actually lived quite long. And he died in York, in England. Yeah.
In York? Wow. Not many emperors die in...
No, not these days, at least.
And a little throwback to our William Wallace episode. He ended up where William Wallace never got to, even though it was shown in the film. So there we go. Full circle, eh?
Mel Gibson and Ridley Scott can bond over the historical inaccuracies in their films, you know. Okay, so that's Septimus Severus. So he's a very successful emperor. He has 2 sons who are Geta and Caracalla, and these are the emperors that are portrayed so brilliantly in Gladiator 2. They are the sons of Severus, and he basically has hopes of raising them both as joint heirs to take over the throne. The problem was that, first of all, they were typical of hereditary princes, very much unsuited to rule, more interested in sort of debauching themselves, drinking excessively, fighting, gambling, whoring, and generally having a good time. And on top of that, they absolutely hated each other. Like, could not be in the room. They would strangle each other, hated each other.
Well, I mean, I can't believe this didn't work. There's always 2 kings, isn't there? Like, whenever you always have 2 kings, right? Any empire works really well under that. So I'm just confused this hasn't worked personally.
The Romans, they always had their 2 consuls, because what One was supposed to keep the other
Very
in check.
true.
The problem is you can't have two people with absolute authority that don't have authority over each other. That's not going to work. Let's face it. Especially if even before they ever even sniffed at power, they literally couldn't stand each other. They hated each other to the point where Roman society began to sort of split down the middle into factions based on whether you preferred Geta or Caracalla. The Colosseum, people were literally sitting in separate halves. The same went for the chariot races. The courts were split. It really was a problem. They were a problem from childhood, basically. Septimus Severus is sick of his sons and decides they need some good old Roman combat to hopefully grow them up a bit. And he hears of a war brewing in Caledonia, which is now Scotland, and heads over there, brings his sons with him and invades Scotland and decides to basically, show them, toughen them up a bit, hoping that it'll sort them out. It doesn't. Septimus Severus is pretty old by this point, and Caracalla is constantly trying to murder him. It's almost like the CIA trying to murder Fidel Castro. It's literally a hilarious amount of sort of hijinks around trying to murder his dad, constantly poisoning his wine and sort of trying to push him off his horse and stuff like that. Geta seems to be the slightly less monstrous of the two. Wasn't that interested in, trying to murder his father. But his father had always been very clear. He named them both Augustus. They had equal power. They were equally revered by the Senate, etc. And but Caracalla was a bit older, so maybe there was some slight deference to that. Septimus Severus is very old. He dies in York, as previously mentioned. And before he died, he gave instructions to the Roman army to hail both his sons as emperor. Caracalla tries to get ahead of the news and declare himself emperor first, but the Roman army kind of refuses and hails them both. So it's all rather embarrassing for Caracalla. Him and his brother, they head back to Rome, and the whole way it's literally a constant threat of assassination on both sides. These guys literally can't stand each other. Anywhere they stay, they're barricading the doors, guards all time. They sort of imagine their tents on either side of the road, literally surrounded by Roman soldiers at all times, so neither of them could get out, sort of strangle each other in the night. Kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
Kind of like us growing up.
Yeah, exactly. And now we have a podcast together. So Who knows? Maybe Caracalla and Geta just started recording a podcast. It would have sorted it all out.
Just need to give it a few more years.
Yeah, exactly. So they get back to Rome. They're crowned emperors together, but within less than a year, Caracalla basically murders Geta. He manages to trick Geta into meeting him in private for the first time since their father's death. And he just murders him. He has a bunch of centurions come in and stab him to death. And that's that. Caracalla is then the sole emperor. And so this is where it sort of diverts from the story in the film, because obviously they're pretty buddy in the film and they ruled together, but that just actually never happened. They were only co-emperors for a very short period. Yeah, and then Caracalla, again, in the film, he spends a lot of time in Rome. That also didn't really happen. He was racked with guilt, actually, upon actually killing his brother. The realization sort of hit him of what he'd done. And he sort of lost his mind, decided the best way to deal with it was to remove anything from reality that reminded him of his brother. So he just went about ordering the execution of anyone who'd ever met his brother or spoken to his brother or his brother liked. And they estimate that he ordered the execution of around 20,000 people. Literally anyone who'd crossed paths with his brother at any point, he had them hunted down.
I think out of all the things I've heard on this podcast so far, that has got to be the most mental thing I've heard. That is 20,000 people. I'm sorry, that's crazy.
Yeah. And obviously a lot of these people were in really important parts of the Roman system. So as I mentioned earlier, they sort of split into factions. About half of everyone who did an important job in the entire Roman Empire was assassinated.
Oh.
Yeah. And then about a year after that, Caracalla, he leaves Rome for the last time. So he only spent about a year in Rome. So he didn't actually spend a lot of time at the Colosseum. I'm sure there were some games when he was inaugurated, but he left Rome and went on a tour of the East around the Roman provinces there. And essentially was just like a horrible guy everywhere he went. Every province he turned up in, he massively upped the taxation. He bankrupted all the local dignitaries to pay for entertainment of his, and sort of sordid entertainment, really debauched, lots of sort of violence and sex and all that kind of stuff. He's a scourge on everywhere he went, letting his soldiers kind of loot and rape Roman towns, for no reason besides he sort of liked it. He really was kind of a monster. To the point where eventually they sort of got sick of him. And on the way to a town called Edessa, he was approached by a supposedly loyal bodyguard who did everyone a favor and ignobly murdered him on the side of the road. And that was the end of Caracalla. Yeah.
So I'm struggling to find the line really between the true story of Caracalla and his brother Geta and Ridley Scott's interpretation of them. I suppose bankrupting the empire, generally being debauched, horrible people. He's got all that right, but otherwise, it seems very, very different to me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Last time he had one emperor. This time he can have two. And to be honest, the performances were great. I think perhaps that was it. Perhaps it was just kind of an interesting dynamic he can change up in this film, rather than just having another emperor.
Just twins,
just twins. I know they weren't twins. One was, slightly older than the other. Yeah.
Did you say that they were twins, or have I just completely made that up?
No, I think they're portrayed as twins in the film.
Okay, but in real life, not twins.
Yeah. And also in the film, interestingly, so Caracalla is the older. He's the guy in the film, in my opinion, the better performance, the sort of older, slightly more domineering brother. Joseph Quinn, who plays the older, more domineering, not completely insane of the two brothers, really, really good performance, plays Emperor Geta in the film. And in reality, he was the younger one that was murdered right up top. And Caracalla was the older, slightly more forceful brother in real life. And he plays a sort of slightly mad brother who, puts his monkey on the throne and things like that. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure the way around there. It's hard to say. I mean, it is an interesting premise, but yeah, I also slightly struggle to see how he went from the reality to what he portrayed in the film. But as
I would say maybe it's an interesting way to show maybe like the two sides of an emperor's, a powerful leader's like mind almost. There's so many stories, right, of people who gain power and then slowly fall into this like completely insane, unhinged person. And maybe that's what they're trying to go for with the twins, where they had the slightly saner one. They're both sort of the same character, debauched, crazy, sex crazed alcoholics, but you have one who's completely invested in it and one who's trying to sort of show some restraint and be a bit more intelligent. And with the death of the intelligent side, you just get the full blown crazy person. I think there's precedent for that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's basically the historical setting, and that's the basis of the film. The rest of the characters, I'm afraid, Pedro Pascal's character, definitely not real. Yes, Commodus' sister, who is Paul Mescal's mother in the film, she was real, but she was murdered in Commodus' reign, so she definitely wouldn't have been around at that point. Lucius Verus, who Paul Mescal plays, was actually, if he was anything, he would have been his own father, because he was the husband of Commodus' sister, who died in the reign of Marcus Aurelius. That was Lucius Verus. So he's sort of just pulling strings together from the historical period. But what other historical inaccuracies sort of rubbed me the wrong way? First of all, what just came to mind? There's a point where Denzel Washington is talking to Joseph Quinn's character, Emperor Geta, and he sort of confesses to him that his brother's going mad, and the disease that infected his loins has spread to his brain. I believe he's probably referring to syphilis there. However, syphilis was a disease discovered in the Americas in the sort of 1600s and didn't exist in Europe at that point. So
There was no sort of pox or anything.
yeah, but not usually. So syphilis is famously an STI that, if left too long, spreads to the brain and causes you to go insane. It's what happened to Al Capone. Yeah,
Right.
so Al Capone, yeah, famously died of syphilis, and he went mad, basically. I think that's what he's referring to, but it doesn't exist. I don't know. It could be something else, but that one, I mean, it sort of set my spidey senses tingling.
Wow, Jack, that is incredibly nitpicky, that one.
You know, this is what I'm doing in the cinema while everyone else is enjoying it. I'm like, well, actually, okay. What I did think was good. I felt in this particular movie, the Colosseum felt more realistic. In the first Gladiator, it feels enormous and the Emperor's quite far away. But I feel in this, they sort of had it more realistic to actually the actual proportions to the Colosseum, where the Emperor is a bit more low down, which is kind of how it really is. The one thing that was definitely historically inaccurate here was that there were men and women sitting together in the Colosseum. The Colosseum was absolutely segregated on class lines and gender, and the women were actually expected to sit up at the top with the slaves. So not very friendly of the Romans.
No, which again you touched on in your newsletter, and I remember a particularly funny cartoon about that. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Check it out. Check it out. It'll be in the show links. On top of that, yeah, so women were in the crowd. That's just wrong. I know, again, he's not going for historical inaccuracy, but perhaps the sort of modern expected inclusivity standards in films are making the Romans out to be far more progressive than they actually were, because they certainly weren't a progressive people.
Yeah,
so.
there was a line where Pedro Pascal's character said, "In war, I've seen bravery from a lot of men and women," and I feel like no matter how much of a forward-thinking, trying to bring back the Senate Roman you were, I don't think it would ever cross your mind to talk about the bravery of women in a speech.
No, the Romans were patriarchal and misogynistic to a T. So let's not. Yeah, I guess it is just kind of modern expectations in films, but sometimes adding them makes out to these quite nasty civilizations out to be nicer than they are, just to sort of make people feel good about themselves. And I don't know if that's a good thing to be doing, to be honest. I think we really should be at least looking at the Romans as they were, which was this sort of very patriarchal, backwards. Women were definitely second-class citizens. I mean, they enslaved people all over the world. Let's not try and make them out to be nice. It's the same with the modern take on Marcus Aurelius. Like, he was this brilliant philosopher king who would have saved the world if only he'd been in charge for longer, when he was perfectly happy to go to extremely genocidal lengths. And I mean genocide in the modern sense, like he set out to exterminate people on the borders of Rome to keep Rome's trade flowing. You know, in modern terms, he's a tyrant of the highest order. But sometimes we project our own views onto them. Okay. One thing I thought was totally unnecessary, and I really can't understand why Ridley Scott decided to do this. Perhaps he just didn't even bother to Google it. In the water battle, there is it's very cool. They row some boats into the Colosseum. That never happened, by the way. How people 2,000 years ago could have been expected to flood a sort of stone and wood contraption, how they got the water there in the first place, it would all just flood it out. It's essentially was not possible.
See, this is really embarrassing because on the walk back from the film, I was, my girlfriend was saying, that's not possible though, that never happened. And I was saying, I don't know, the Romans were famous for their plumbing and aqueducts. I'm pretty sure it was doable. And now you just...
Yeah. So actually, it's one of those things that's probably come down the historical record as like a misheard. There are plenty of bodies of water around Rome where they could have just done this on a lake. And they sort of refer to everything as the games. And so you assume it's happening in the Colosseum. That probably didn't happen. So what is more likely is, as I say, they just go to a lake. There's even some inspiration that Ridley Scott took in the first film. There's that really cool line where he's like, "We are about to die, salute you," and they salute Commodus. First of all, it was not actually said by gladiators at all, apart from in one occasion where it's documented where Emperor Tiberius was observing a sea battle at a body of water near Rome. And the gladiators said the famous line, "We are about to die, salute you." And apparently Tiberius made a sort of weak joke like, "Well, you're not all going to die." And
Wow, Tiberius.
and then the gladiators heard him say that, assumed he'd pardoned them, and refused to fight. And so this sort of slightly ancient man, Tiberius, had to get down to the lakeside and sort of harangue them into killing each other because the fight had just stopped happening.
That is awkward. Well, I mean, obviously it was spoken about then because of the debacle that happened afterwards, but surely that doesn't mean that it didn't happen more often. Just not worth mentioning.
There's no evidence at all that it ever did happen.
Okay.
I think that's it could have been completely lost to the mist of time. The chances of it being possible are very, very slim. And there's no evidence, there's no concrete evidence that it did happen.
Okay. And now let's get back to that point because I'm really annoyed about this point as well. The boat battle, the Battle of Salamis. They were
So they come out and they announce the Battle of Salamis with the Trojans fighting the Persians. I mean, come on.
That is unbelievable. Why? What's the point?
Yeah, what is the point? The Trojans, right? The Trojan War, if it did happen, it very well may have done. But if it did happen, was some 300, 400, 500 years before the Battle of Salamis in ancient Bronze Age lore. The Battle of Salamis is well documented, and it did not involve the Trojans at all. It was the Athenians primarily, with the Spartans and other Greeks fighting the Persians.
Check it out in Jack's 300 newsletter.
God, we're doing so many plugs today.
I know. I just keep covering old ground. It's great.
Exactly. I can't wait for all the engagement I'm going to get over this. It's going to be so why do you think he's done that?
Well, I don't know. Honestly, maybe there is some sort of the Romans washed history and they're saying to the Aeneid that they're related to the Trojans, and so maybe they're trying to say that their ancestors fought and defeated the Persians, which actually I've just thought up now. It's actually maybe quite a good reason he was coming for. But honestly, I cannot believe it all. Not only that, but the Trojans at the time of Salamis, where Troy was thought to be situated, wasn't that currently Persia?
They were Persians, yeah. Exactly. On the way to invade Greece, Xerxes, with his massive Persian army, stopped at the ruins of Troy and sacrificed to Athena to encourage her to help him in his fight against the Athenians. And all of that area he was on was part of the Persian Empire. So the Trojans definitely absolutely not involved in the Battle of Salamis at all. Perhaps even they were on the side of the Persians because they'd, juiced up Xerxes' sacrifice to Athena by him doing it on the ruins of their city. So I think that's, to me, that was the unforgivable one. That to me tops the man drinking coffee, reading the newspaper in a cafe.
Because people are going to come away from this, maybe having never heard of the Battle of Salamis, and for the rest of their lives are going to go along thinking that the Trojans fought the Persians at this. Like whenever someone's like, oh yeah, the Battle of Salamis, they'll be like, oh, I know about that. It's the Trojans versus the Persians, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's just...
He's made people stupider.
Unnecessary, fake news,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Disappointing. I have no idea. That was I sort of laughed out loud when that happened. And me being a huge history nerd, I think everyone else, didn't even bat an eyelid, but I thought that one was really kind of ridiculous. Other historical inaccuracies, obviously, you can't ride a rhinoceros. That was cool. I thought it was a cool
give it a
scene.
go.
Yeah, you can give it a go. I liked how Paul Mescal finished off the rhinoceros, sort of jumping out of the way and it running into a wall. I thought that was good. I thought the guy who was riding the rhinoceros sort of looked a bit lackluster. He's kind of... I think if you're going to bring a rhinoceros into it, then you're going to CGI one. Either make it really impressive and sort of mythical, and don't try and make it too much like a real rhinoceros. You sort of they have the cut the zoom out shot, and you just see its tiny little rhinoceros legs running around. It's sort of I don't know, it made it a bit less scary for me. Yeah, and I mentioned earlier about the bit where the guy throws the axe. Um, yeah, also that fight scene. Also, the guy who's like, Paul Mescal's is like, go to the walls. And one of the guys is like, why are you telling me to do that? He's like, all right, because you'll die. And then he gets hit by him and then doesn't die, and then gets hit the second time and does. You're just like, all right, well, that was.
That's the choice of the stunt coordinators and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, again, it was a weird fight, but historically, the riding the rhinoceros is. I think maybe you could get someone on top of a rhino, strap them on there, but to get them
Yeah.
to turn it and point it.
Yeah, true. I mean,
Um,
they rode elephants, but I've never heard of anyone riding a rhinoceros ever. Um, even in 300, which is almost, I mean, they purposely tried to make it sort of mythological. There is a rhinoceros in that, but nobody's riding it, you know. Anyway, but there were plenty of rhinos in the Colosseum. I mean, that was a thing. Wild animals in the Colosseum was very much part and parcel of normal Colosseum activities. They'd have bears from Caledonia. They would bring rhinoceroses. There would be tigers. There would be lions. I'm not sure about sort of mutant baboons, bold mutant baboons, but I
or
thought that
maybe he
was
just
really cool.
had his head shaved, had his body shaved. Maybe he had some sort of illness.
Yeah,
Um,
he's got alopecia, perhaps.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool. I like that an awful lot. I thought that bit was because having spent a fair amount of time out in East Africa, baboons scare the living daylights out of me. They are the size of a human and have big fangs, so I really kind of clicked with that. A few other things. The premise of the movie is that Lucius Verus is from Numidia, and the Romans are coming to invade. Numidia at the time of the twin emperors, the brother emperors, was very much a province of Rome and had been for almost 2 centuries. So no need to invade it, basically. It wasn't the sort of last holdout against the Romans. It was very much a part of the core of the Roman Empire and had been conquered about 2 centuries earlier. So I don't know why they couldn't just pick somewhere else. But North Africa had been quelled almost 200 years earlier. So that was a bit of a strange choice to me. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's probably because Numidia has such a cool name. If I
True.
had to pick a reason. Also, I think you've got the Numidian lion from Hercules. So maybe some sort of subtle, like bubbling through of information came to Ridley Scott, and he was like, Numidia. That speaks of strength to me. Possibly.
Okay.
But yeah, again, I mean, of all the things that happened in that film,
That's not the worst.
No.
Yeah. And then one other thing, the gates of Rome, that's sort of the scene, the setting for the last sort of battle between Paul Mescal and Denzel Washington, the two armies facing off at each other. First of all, I felt sort of slightly blue balls by that whole scene. I thought we were going to get another big set piece battle, which was cool. It was a shame that didn't happen. And then also that's the gate of Rome, right? So Rome was conquered a few times in its history. Definitely had walls. Didn't have a sort of small little stream. So I don't know. I also felt a bit weird about that.
I kept thinking with the stream, because obviously there's, like you said, there's walls. I kept thinking maybe it was trying to represent the Rubicon.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. Trying to represent the Rubicon, which actually is also an equally unimpressive little stream. Caesar didn't cross it in a bridge; he walked through it, which apparently now runs through an industrial estate in northern Italy. It's sort of a canal, basically.
But then again, yeah, it's about at least a week's march away from Rome.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of on the northern tip of Italy.
It's a visual thing, surely. Must have been the stream.
Yeah. So those are just some of the historical inaccuracies. I don't want to go into too many of them because we're running slightly out of time, and it will bore you. What's your final thoughts on that, Charlie?
Well, I think that was nice. I think it was good to know. I've learned a lot. Very interesting, the sort of real story behind Caracalla and Geta. Nice to get a new crazy, mad, psychopathic Roman emperor under the belt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Always fun. Probably some of the funnest characters in history.
Yeah. definitely. I think I didn't know a lot about those guys before the film, so it's nice that it's nudged me in their direction. I liked as I mentioned, I thought they were absolutely fantastic in the film. Definitely inspired by some other crazy emperors you probably heard more of. Caligula electing his horse as consul. Obviously, that was the inspiration for the monkey being elected consul as well. But it's nice to get some new ones. You're right.
Yeah, and it's nice to discuss some of the things he got wrong to maybe try and get into the mind of Ridley Scott a little bit. Maybe I feel like it's shed more light on perhaps some of the reasons he did the things he did, than it would have without knowing this information. So to get a chance to sort of try and get in the headspace of one of the greatest living film directors, um, it's a pleasure as well. So the film then, what's your favorite bit?
Yeah. The opening scene I thought was amazing. I would have liked to see more of that. Um, yeah, I thought that was absolutely brilliant. It was a shame, I think, how quickly they killed off his wife, with the arrow straight through the chest. Few to be honest, actually, I'm going to poo poo the best bit, but I thought too many people were killed with arrows. The wife, yeah, Commodus's sister, and Pedro Pascal all shot to death with arrows.
I wonder if they were trying to use arrows, I guess, to represent sort of an evil, long distance, impersonal killing compared to Paul Mescal having the sword in his hand the whole time.
Yeah,
Um,
perhaps.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
the first bit was great. What was your best bit?
um, honestly, just all the times where it was just sort of Paul Mescal in slightly less action-packed scenes. He obviously is a very charismatic character, befriending people, sort of showing his strength, that kind of stuff. I felt there should have been more of that, less big set pieces, more getting into the head of him.
Mhm.
Um, and then the worst bit, the rhino. You?
No, actually, I haven't mentioned it yet. Throughout the film, there's an awful lot of sort of quoting from the first film, and some of it's good. Strength and Honor, they reference Maximus a lot. I thought it was really good. I thought the one time to me that it really smacked of kind of lazy writing was, yeah, Paul Mescal and Denzel Washington are. Denzel Washington is explaining to him that he has a destiny and that he's going to use Paul Mescal as his instrument for the destiny. And Paul Mescal goes, I will not be your instrument in this lifetime or the next.
You're right. I
That
completely
was
forgot
the
about that bit.
worst line. I could have like spat my drink out and left at that point. I thought that was frap.
Why? I just don't get after all these years of people doing callbacks and people going, that was so cringy. Why did you do that? Why do they still do it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Everyone ironically goes, oh, that's from the first film, but actually you hate it and it pulls you out of the film.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
actually,
no.
to bring back to that one scene again, final rant. Denzel Washington says to Paul Mescal, you're going to be my instrument to take over Rome. How? Does he use him at all? No, he doesn't. He then goes away and kills the emperors himself and then becomes consul. And then actually, Paul Mescal has nothing to do with his plan.
well, besides defending the woman, maybe killing Pedro Pascal.
But that had already happened by that point.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that was the thing. It's just confusing, murky. Anyway,
Yeah. What's your worst bit?
my worst bit. Well, I think you've said it now. To be honest,
That line?
that that upset me. That's
Yeah.
all saying the Trojans. I was with my girlfriend and a friend of mine watching the film, and I turned to my right. My girlfriend was asleep. I turned to my left, and I was like, Trojans, and he was like, shh. So I didn't get to complain to anyone.
Oh, funny. Yeah, at one point I was with my friend Chris, and at one point I looked to the left, and he was also fast asleep. He was wearing a beanie, and he sort of taken it off and stuffed it inside his hoodie, and was using it as a pillow. So it wasn't even sort of accidental falling asleep. He'd
Yeah.
very much decided to go to sleep. So
Anyway,
right,
you can't give a better recommendation for a film than that, really.
no,
Can you?
exactly.
So on that note, should we head off?
Yeah, so that was our hot takes on Gladiator 2, the first installment of History versus Hollywood Hot Takes. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. It's a little bit freeform, as I'm sure you can tell from listening. Charlie, any final thoughts?
No, it was very fun and very therapeutic, actually.
Yeah, get it all out.
Get it all out. Yeah. But again, like all things, when you overanalyze something, like you do in podcasts, you come away from it probably thinking worse of it than it was. At the end of the day, fun, action-packed film, it puts you in the shoes of a gladiator. And that's really, what more could you ask for?
Yeah, exactly. Definitely give it a watch. It's worth a watch for sure. So that'll be all from us tonight. So thank you very much for listening. This has been History vs. Hollywood Hot Takes. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you again for listening to an episode of History vs. Hollywood. I really hope you've enjoyed the show. You might have noticed, but I'm just beginning to get this show off the ground, and it would be invaluable to have your support in doing so. The best way you can help us out is by leaving a review wherever you're listening. You can do this on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, wherever. If you happen to be listening directly in Substack, perhaps you could just let me know what you thought in the comments. If you like the show, please go ahead and like it. You can restack it, or if you really like the show, then perhaps you would consider adding me to your recommendations. That would be absolutely amazing. On top of that, there is a paid option, so you could consider upgrading your subscription. That would go a very long way to supporting me, helping me pay my artists and contributors, and buy research materials that make this all possible. But that's completely optional. I'm just happy to have you here and listening. So thank you once again, and we'll see you next time for another episode of History vs. Hollywood. Goodbye.